The US won the race in the lunar program, leaving the USSR behind. After America had been shocked that the Russians had launched their first satellite, were the first to fly around and photograph the backside of the moon, and had launched the first man into space. The Americans had only one chance left, landing on the moon. Here, the problem began. The most surprising thing is that the Americans took the path that the USSR was most used to. The whole flower of science was brought together in one fist. There was no war of orders between the corporations, as is usually the case. They simply chose the most suitable options. But in the Soviet Union, the L-1 lunar project caused a real struggle between the design bureaus of Korolev and Khelami. An interesting fact is that the USSR already had the Proton launch vehicle. It made it possible to make a manned flight around the moon. But according to recollections of participants of that time, SP Korolev said that he would not put the cosmonauts on a poisonous rocket. Indeed, Proton uses heptyl as fuel. The oxidizer is nitric acid. Why in Kazakhstan there were many cases of poisoning the local population, who used the first stages of Proton for household needs. Later, there was information that Proton was not used due to the fact that during launch, very high overloads. Allegedly astronauts could not withstand them. To what extent this is true, only the designers can answer. 2 astronauts were to take part in our project. One would stay in orbit, the second would descend to the surface of our satellite. The first man to set foot on the moon was planned to be A.A. Leonov. Gagarin was assigned as the backup. The H-1 launcher was supposed to carry a Soyuz spacecraft with a manned lunar module into lunar orbit. So what was the reason? To begin with, space is very expensive. They have been economizing on everything. The problem with the H-1 was in its first stage. For launches, for disasters. The first thing that catches my eye, however, is that for the tests of the very first stage a test stand was not built. All the engines of the first stage were tested on the ground separately. Thus, the cause of its failure could not be determined. When it became known that the Americans were about to land on the moon, the Leonov's crew, according to his recollections, asked to send them on this flight. But no such permission was granted. And not in vain. On February 21, 1969, half a year before the launch of Apollon 11, the H-1 launched without a crew. But at 69 minutes into the flight, the rocket exploded. The second H-1 exploded on the launch pad on July 3, 1969. The launch pad was almost completely destroyed. It became clear to everyone that we would not be the first on the moon. And so it was. These disasters were preceded by no less tragic events for Soviet cosmonautics. From a fairly routine operation, because of individual intolerance to anesthesia, Sergei Pavlovich Korolev dies. Rather, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin dies. The people who took Korolev's place were talented designers. There is no doubt about that. But Korolev had a genius talent for organization, a talent for persuasion. His sharpness was legendary. Though he never punished anyone undeservedly. And most importantly, he had access to the Kremlin. He could argue with anyone, regardless of rank or position. After all, the first satellite would not have flown so soon if it did not fit into the military project. And it wasn't just any satellite. A radio beacon to guide ballistic missiles. The military then grappled with such a fantastic project. The military then seized upon such a fantastic project. Korolev prudently concealed the fact that its cost was such that it would bankrupt just the country. The king needed a flight. And the military bought it. The necessity of the H-1 was not only due to the flight to the moon. The rocket was capable of putting into orbit stations weighing more than 100 tons. The Zvezda station was not designed for peaceful purposes. Korolev was simply brilliant at using the needs of the military, their desires, to his far-reaching ends. He was able, or by cunning and whereby his strong character, to beat out funds for his projects. His death derailed many things. And Gagarin's death completed the job. It must be admitted that there were no people whose opinion was indisputably listened to in the government of the USSR. The opinion of the chief designer and the first cosmonaut of the planet were like axioms for many. All doors in the Kremlin were open before them. Their opinion could not be simply brushed aside. They were very significant people. It is entirely possible to say that with their death, the rapid development of cosmonautics was virtually over. Yes, there were successes. But few people know that the goal of Korolev was not the moon. His goal was Mars. And the lunar project was an intermediate link. After a change in the leadership of the Korolev Design Bureau, everything flowed like in the stagnant times. The new management did not receive any money for the test bench. After the restoration of the launch complex, 2 more launches of one were made. Again, 2 disasters. Again a failure of the first stage. The Americans were already walking around the moon. In general, the project was quietly abandoned. Mars was forgotten about. There was an attempt to revive the project when Russia successfully tested the rocket carrier Energia. Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987 even suggested a joint flight to Mars with the Americans in 2001. But we will hardly fly to Mars in the next 40 years. There is no USSR. The United States is the undisputed leader in space. They have no one to compete with. So it makes no sense to spend hundreds of billions on a flight. The moon was a matter of prestige, boosting the American spirit, which was badly damaged by the success of the USSR. Now this stimulus is gone. Finally, the roof of the assembly and testing facility at Baikonur collapsed like a tombstone. It buried the only sample of Energia carrier rocket. This put an end to grand plans of Russia. Now even popular science movies say that the most powerful launch vehicle is Saturn and Ariane 6, which is under construction. But our Energia and its modifications were supposed to launch objects of up to 230 tons. Saturn V is not capable of that. It was built at the limit of its capabilities. And Ariane 6? They found something to surprise the Russians. For Russian designers who remember old times with a melancholy, such launch vehicle is long past phase. From all said above, it should be noted that the scrapping of lunar program, change of leaders in astronautics started the decline of Russian leadership in the space. Our strongmen have forgotten the words of Tsiolkovsky. Whoever conquers outer space will own the world. We, as always, have not heeded this prophecy. China, on the other hand, has realized it very well. Its space program is so fantastic that many do not believe that China will carry it out. And they shouldn't. Remember the early 1990s. There was an article that China was going to launch manned space flights. Everyone treated it as a joke. There was even a joke. A Chinese spaceship crashed. 2 astronauts and 44 stokers died, so China's project to land on the moon and build a permanent base in 2021 no longer looks so fantastic. I guess everything in Russia rests on personalities. The fact that the Soviet cosmonaut did not set foot on the moon is a reflection of our reality. It will not be easy for us to regain our lost ground. It is entirely possible that we will never regain leadership in space.